Hello, it's Christy. So, what the heck with epoxy clay? What is that? Have you used it before? Are you curious? Have you used it and know everything about it, but are also just watching this because it's fun and you want to see something else? I am here to play with epoxy clay with you, just to show you how simple, how easy, and how fun it can be. Specifically, we're going to use ApoxieSculpt, and I've got in the description a link where you can find it both by the manufacturer and off on my little website. And I'm going to be putting epoxy clay into a little bezel to make a pendant and then jamming stuff in. It's the simplest project in the universe. If you have never touched epoxy clay, this is the place to start because you cannot mess it up at all, no matter what you do. So why not give it a try? All right, you ready? Let's create. Let's look at what you will need to create a simple embellished bezel. I'm going to use just a heart-shaped bezel. And anything that's made out of metal or any other material will work. Usually you find bezels made out of metal. And I'm just using a heart shape for fun, but you could use whatever you like. So have a bezel handy. Then we're going to need some epoxy clay. Epoxy clay is a two-part thing. If I can open this up. And I'm going to use a blue color, but you can use any color you like. And it usually has a part A and B, the base that's got the color in it, and then the hardener. And we're going to mix those in equal proportions and create the putty that goes inside the bezel, to which we will add all of our embellishments. To mix the epoxy clay, it's always good to have a pair of disposable gloves and some spoons to scoop it out with. And I'm using a little piece of silicone to work on. It's a non-stick surface. You don't have to do that, not a problem. But this also keeps the bezel from moving around, so that's kind of fun. So a non-stick surface will allow me to mix and put any extra residue of epoxy clay so that it doesn't permanently stick to anything. But again, that's optional. All right, to pick up and place the pieces inside your bezel, you can use any number of pickup tools, including a little toothpick with some beeswax on it, or a pickup pencil, a little wax pickup pencil, or a crystal katana or a kubaton. Those are like my favorite pickup tools, but any of these will work just groovily. Then you're finally going to need some embellishments to put in. Now, I've got a couple things that are in my online store at the moment, and in the description I'll have a link to my online store. I'm going to just use some glass beads that have sort of a raku metallic patterning, glazed finish on them, and then some glass rhinestones for this style right here. But on this, I've used some tourmaline chips. I have a nautilus shell heart on a heart kind of a thing. But pretty much anything you want to jam in here is great. The best things are glass, crystal, stone, metal, ceramic. All of those non-porous things grab onto the epoxy clay really well. You can also use acrylic and plastic, but it's not going to have as good of a grab. All right, so gather up your materials and then let's just go through the process. Okay, my gloves are on. I am going to scoop out 2 equal parts of my epoxy clay, put them on my non-stick surface here. And you only want as much as you will need to fill up the bezel. And remember that you're using 2 equal halves. So when you scoop out 1 half, try to imagine how much you would need to fill up the bezel and take half that amount. This is going to be more than I need. I always make a little bit of extra. Sometimes I put things on top of things. For example, on this one, I used another little ball of the epoxy clay to set this down on top of the other things. So having a little bit extra is never a problem. You want to be careful not to make so much that you waste, of course, but that just comes with practice. So I've used 2 different spoons because I don't want to cross-contaminate my 2 parts. This, like any 2-part material, is a chemical reaction that occurs when the 2 parts are blended together. So I want to be careful about interacting accidentally by double dipping with the same spoon. And I'm going to go by visual volume as opposed to weight. I don't know exactly if these 2 materials have the same weight, but this one feels denser to me. So I don't think you can just go by weight to see if it's exactly even. You want to go by the look, or you could get a tiny little scoop so that it's always the same each time. I'm going to take my two balls that look roughly the same, and I'm going to mix them thoroughly with my gloved fingers. Now, the reason I use gloves is this is a chemical, and it's always wise to just minimize your direct skin contact with chemicals. Skins are like big old sponges that suck up things, so you want to minimize how many chemicals that they suck up. I think just overall, that's kind of smart, don't you? All right, so you notice how I'm mixing. I'm just smashing it so that I'm making sure that the two parts really get thoroughly blended. I don't want any streaks or any parts that haven't been completely mixed, because that means that the final putty will not harden fully if it's got parts that aren't mixed together. This process should really take no more than about a minute. So what I'm going to do is look it all over, see if it looks thoroughly blended. Can I see any streaks? If so, I'll just mash it a little bit more. And I'm going to take a little bit out like we talked about, just set that off to the side in case I need it. That's probably more than I need. So let me just take a little less than that. And this would be to add another bead on top if I chose to do that. All right, so now I've got my ball to mix it out with. I'm going to, or mix my ball to spread inside the bezel. Sorry, words. So I'm going to take my gloves off, and we're going to start putting that inside here and spread it all around. I'm going to do this just with my regular fingers now without gloves, because the gloves have some sticky residue on it, which means that will get all over the bezel, which I prefer not to do. And I'm going to have a wet wipe handy so that I can rinse my fingers off as I work. Okay, so one of the easiest ways to do this is sort of make a kind of a teardrop shape so that I can just press that in on one side and smash it as far as it will go. I'm making it a little lower than the surface of my bezel so that it's not bulging over the top. Although you certainly could bulge it over the top if you wanted to, but I like there being a little bit of space so that the final beads are a little bit more flush to the surface instead of bulging over the top. But that's a matter of preference. If you want to do it a different way, you certainly can. So what I'm doing now is I'm kind of pushing it around so that I'm getting it all the way to every edge, so there's no gaps. See how I'm kind of pushing it so there's no gaps, but then pulling it back from the sides so that there are no overlaps either. And the tricky part is getting it right in that little point, making sure there's no space there either. Okay, so now I've got it completely full on the whole piece. I'm going to take my wet wipe and just do a gentle rub along that bezel, because that might have gotten some sticky fingerprints, which just kind of leaves a little film that will dry on there, and we don't want that. Okay, so now let's go from here and start adding things. I want to add my largest bits first. So I'm going to kind of scatter these all over the place and see what we've got here. You can use needle nose tweezers also to pick up and place things. Sometimes these larger beads like this are a little harder to pick up just with a pickup tool, but one of these things will work out just great. Now on this one, I put that circle kind of right up here in the corner because it really kind of fits in that space. That's up to you. You can put it right in the center and move everything around it. You can just play with whatever you want. You can't do this wrong. No matter what you do, it's going to look interesting. So I've got that in there. And as I push it in, it might bulge around. If that bulge gets out of control or doesn't look like what you want, you can take another little tool and just come by and scrape away the excess from the side if you want to. You always can do that and then smooth it back around and go from there. So make sure, if you do that, you wipe your tools. This is the Wow It's Awesome tool. This is my kind of go-to sculpting tool. I use it for everything. There'll be a link in the description specifically for that tool. Okay, so now what? Well, now I'm going to take these awesome little dagger beads and just stick them somehow that looks cool to me. And what would that be? I don't know. I'm just going to wing it. So let's just see how this goes. Let's put a couple of them right there. That looks good, right? And let's see if one would fit here. Sure. It may not fit here, though. Let's see. Kind of doing a little sun ray thing, but it's tight. That would make it go over the edge. How do we feel about that? I feel like we want to sort of contain everything inside there, so I'm not going to let that one be like that. But I have this little thing. What if I take this one and I just tuck it right in there? Just for funsies. So see, what you're doing is you're just sort of shoving things around to make a design. I really like to just go with the flow and not over plan it, but some people really prefer the comfort of planning things And if so, then you definitely can sort of kind of play around a little bit and see what it looks like. You have an hour to an hour and a half of time to play with this before it starts getting a little bit too stiff to take the beaded elements well and make them stick well. So you have got some time on here to kind of play and see how your design goes. So you don't have to wing it. But there is a certain kind of joy that comes in just letting the creativity take you where it wants to. So, you know, give that a try. If you haven't done that, what's there to lose? A few dollars worth of supplies, that's about all. And you might have some great fun. All right, so now I've got what I think is a kind of decent arrangement. What do you think? So now I have a couple of choices. I can leave all of this little leftover clay just exactly as it is. I tend not to do that because it will look a little bit more like, you know, stepped in bubble gum and you had some beads on the floor and it was a, you know, kind of a glunk. So I don't usually prefer that. So if I'm going to leave it like this, then I will sometimes put powder on. I'll sometimes use my tool to scratch little patterns in. But in this particular instance, I have a better solution, and that is these tiny little rhinestones. So this is, again, another thing I carry in my shop, but they're pretty common to find. You probably have some in your stash already. So this is an AB, Aurora Borealis finish, which just means this sort of shimmery iridescence. And I just love how it can fill in all the gaps with the same kind of neat iridescent pattern that these sort of raku finish beads have already started. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start using them of various sizes and press them in wherever I think might look good. And that one had little pieces in there too. Huh, get off. He didn't belong there. Although I love those little ones. Let's hang on to those because they go in the little spots. All right, like this. So I use my tools to kind of shove things where they need to go, and my pickup tool to pick and place. So you don't want to push it in with your pickup tool, all right? Because that is going to mush the wax tip, which is not so great. Also, if you're using a white pickup pencil, it sometimes leaves little white marks on the surface of the bead or crystal. Those can wipe off very easily, so fret not. That comes away when you're done. Okay, so I'm just going to pick and place. It's kind of the easiest sort of creativity that there is. And you'll notice that sometimes if it's a tight squeeze, but I think it can fit, I'm just going to sort of put it in there and then gently start shoving. If things go under other things, that's okay. And there's another little trick that I have, is if you pick up one of these little things sideways, let's get that and hold on to it sideways, right? Tweezers work good here. You can slip that in like this, and it will fill in that gap right up next to the edge. So we're just going to fill in everything until we like it. Now I'm seeing as I'm filling this in, this one's just being a little bit too pushed around because I put too many other things there. So let's get that out of the way. And you know what else is, you see how I push that down so much that there's a big hole? We can just repair that with that little extra that we had. Enough to fit a new piece right in. Let's get a medium-sized one. This one will work. There, that's a little bit better fit, don't you think? And as usual, if there's any gunky things, just use your tool to smooth it back out and make sure it looks pretty. And you can use any kind of mica powder or pastel powder at the very end to change the color or fill in the gaps if you wish. All right, let's just go. Okay, so I've got most everything in. I'm going to go around the edge again with the wet wipe just to make sure anything over the edge or any stickiness is wiped off. And I'm going to look and see if there's any gaps that I missed. I see one right there. So you notice that as I put them on the side, I've tried to tilt them so that I can see the shiny faceted thing, not the side. And there's a little bit of where the epoxy clay is sticking over the edge, just a little, but I don't think anything is marring the view. So I think we're looking pretty darn good. One last wipe. Okay, what do you think? So I do want to show you putting a thing on top of a thing, right? So we talked about that a little bit. Is the nifty thing about this clay, the epoxy clay, is that it does allow you to add something on top of something because it sticks to itself and to the other things really well. So like what if we took that there and we put another crystal like right on top there. So you see I made a little ball of epoxy clay and now I've placed this, and as I press it, it's going to kind of glip around and make like a little round donut around it, which I think looks just fine. And I like that. So if you want to do that, you can. You don't have to. And then I'm going to look to see if maybe one more right beside it here would also look fun. So I'm pressing it down just a little bit. Then I'm going to find the right size stone crystal and then press it into place. If you press it and it starts getting out of control or it looks messy, just scrape it off and wipe down the crystal and then do it again because you want that little blob to look fun and consistent all around. Okay, so what do you think? I think that looks really great. If you want to add additional ones of those, you can, but I think that's holding its own pretty nicely. So now all you've got to do is just let this dry. Leave it alone. It will take 24 hours to completely cure. It's usually starting to get stiff in about an hour, hour and a half, and then it is partially set up within 4 to 8 hours, but it does take a 24-hour to feel like it's completely, thoroughly cured. And that's it. Ta-da! See? What did I tell you? Could it be any simpler than that? It could not. Could it have turned out any more exciting than that? Maybe, but I really think it turned out fantastic just as it is. So I hope you will get in there with that epoxy clay and fill things up and stick things in it and have a lot of fun. Happy creating.